Hi, my name's Mike Jackson and I am Secretary of Lesbians and Gay Support the Miners, and welcome to this world transformed meeting of God Save Our Queens, whatever happened to gay liberation. And greetings all sorts of comrades on the panel, from Red Pepper, LGBT plus socialist, fantastic t-shirt you've got out at the moment, and to our dear beloved comrades from Lesbians and Gay Support the Migrants. And I'm sorry I can't be there with you today in person. I've been asked to speak about what were the politics of the gay liberation and the queer movements that came afterwards, and have we achieved gay liberation? If not, why not? Okay. So LGSM, of course, happened during the miners' strike, which is 1984-85, and hence a reference to the Augury Truth and Justice campaign, which is in this blue placard next to me. But I personally came out 10 years prior to that. I was slightly too late for the beginning of gay liberation. That happened in Britain, in London, in the year 1970, and I came out in late 1973. So I missed the actual foundation of the Gay Liberation Front. And they were very interesting years in the 70s. Obviously, we had absolutely no rights whatsoever. And in fact, I came out 6 years after the Sexual Offences Act was passed in 1967. And although that decriminalised homosexuality, one of the ironies of that act being passed, for the next, for several years following the passage of that particular act, there were more prosecutions of gay men than there'd ever been before, because with that new act came a new law called gross indecency, and the police quite illegally entrapped gay men in public toilets and so forth. So that decriminalisation of homosexuality as such in 1967 really didn't bring us that much at all in terms of progress legally and in terms of our rights. But what it did do was it meant actually campaigning for gay rights was a safer thing to do than it had been prior to that act being passed. And that prompts me to talk about a man who really is woefully unrepresented in LGBT history, and he really needs to be kind of brought to the fore in that respect. And it's a guy called Alan Horsfall, who in the 1960s, and possibly stretching back a bit earlier to that, late 1950s, was responsible for forming the Northwest Campaign for Homosexual Law Reform, which is a precursor to what became eventually a Campaign for Homosexual Equality. And Alan was a working class gay man. He lived in Burnley, Lancashire, near to where I originate. And the house he lived in Burnley actually was owned by the National Coal Board. He was an admin worker for the Coal Board. And from that very house, he actually started petitions and basically campaigning openly as a gay man for law reform for gay people. Incredibly important person, Alan. And you know, as I said, he was working class. He stood as a Labour councillor in Burnley for quite a number of years. So in a sense, Alan got there 10 years before Lesbians and Gay Support the Miners did. And we must always be mindful of that. There are many people who've kind of trodden the path of history, who's smoothed out the way forward for ourselves, and we will be forever grateful for those people in the past who did that kind of thing. So we were charged with having to develop a new kind of politics. So you can't go to a reference library and ask for a book on liberation, particularly gay liberation. No such thing exists. You have to make it up as you go along. And we did some pretty silly things and thought some pretty silly things, as well as really important things and serious things. And as time goes by, hopefully the silly things fall off the edge, and the more important things come to the fore. And I cannot believe how much further forward we've come now, all these years later. I never expected us to get as far as we've got, even though it's not perfect. And what's dark about these present days, I am seeing yet again an attack on our community, and in this case, attack on the trans part of our community. And my God, has that got echoes of the way we were treated as gay men 40 years ago. The arguments are almost the same. The misinformation, the media attacking people, and although there may be some legitimacy on both sides, what I think is really important here overall is it's an attempt to split off the trans community from the LGBT plus community, and I'm not standing for that, and I hope you're not standing for that, because solidarity is absolutely everything. Indeed, that's why we formed Lesbians and Gays Support the Minors. And we went in to support the minors completely unconditionally. We were expecting to deal with homophobia. In fact, we never came across any, not in the community that we supported. And what was beyond our wildest dreams was the outcome of our support for them, as I say, which was unconditional, was the passage of the motions in 1985 at TUC and Labour Party conferences that supported lesbian and gay rights. So really, long before it became enshrined in legislation, our real significant progress in terms of gaining our rights and gaining our mouthpieces, as it were, was through the trade union movement. So what happened in 1985 following those conference decisions was the unions worked, particularly with the more left-wing progressive Labour councils in London, Manchester, Liverpool. They worked with those councils as employers of LGBT people and started writing equal opportunities policies, and things like you could be sacked simply for being gay, and so that the unions negotiated to make that basically outlawed, and it was going to be years before all that kind of stuff was actually adopted by central government into law. So that we owe the trade unions a great deal for that, and the trade unions in a sense owe something, because what's happened is that we've got LGBT plus people working as activists within the trade union movement in a way that they wouldn't have done before, because they'd have been, for whatever reasons, too frightened or whatever to come out and felt that they wouldn't be supported. And now that they know that they're going to get support, there's some damn fine activists emerging from the LGBT movement. And of course the same can be said about the women's movements and the black and brown movements as well. Our trade union movement altogether is much stronger now that they're much more inclusive about people coming from other backgrounds, whereas in the 1960s and 70s the trade unions were they had a long way to go with regards to that kind of thing. Here we are again, 40 years on, and I am hearing the same things again that I heard back then. Inflation is raging because of energy problems, but the right wing, the capitalists, the apologists for capitalism, are blaming yet again the trade unions for exorbitant pay increases. It's absolute rubbish, and every time they do this we need to call them out for it. Just like as what happened in the 70s when we had the oil crisis, inflation was stoked by the energy suppliers, and the wages of workers were simply wages that were trying to keep up with that inflation. So a 10 or a 15% wage increase was no wage increase whatsoever, as it isn't today, so long as the inflation is at that rate. It's simply treading water. But they will do it, and it's very important for them to do it, because the last thing that the ruling class want, the last thing that the capitalist class want, is us to be united in solidarity. That frightens the life out of them, and that's our greatest goal. And let's hope, what with the RMT, the CWU, and all kinds of different unions taking action at the moment, if we see those actions working together in solidarity, we will be an invincible force. Solidarity to your comrades, and have a great conference. Comradeship and solidarity. Bye bye.